Greetings, this is Bradford Donald Keller Townsend, and this is a Council on Foreign Relations Watchman video. We start here with my favorite topic, oil and energy. As I know that it's grossly misunderstood by the public. They do not realize that oil is literally in your food, as it is a component of growing petrochemical, mechanical agriculture, which is rapidly degrading and destroying the soil of the United States and the vast, overwhelming majority of farmland around the world, which is losing tens of millions of hectares a year of farmland, and the farmland that is remaining is over, I think, 72% degraded. A lot of food is grown in dead dirt that has no humus living topsoil, which has earthworms and little insects and lots of roots and all types of fungus and microscopic organisms in it. So healthy soil is teeming. If you take a kilo of soil, it's teeming with billions and billions of microorganisms and organisms you can see, like the insects and the worms, and nematodes is a type of worm. Without getting into the technical jargon, we're rapidly destroying our farmland, and the farmland that we have under cultivation is shrinking. And oil and energy is a major component, because the energy from the oil is turned into diesel fuel, and that diesel fuel powers large machines, harvesters, planters, tractors that compact the soil and chop it up and kill it and spray all kinds of chemicals. And major components of the chemicals that go on there and the fertilizers come from fossil fuels, such as methane, which is cracked, which is the chemical term, and then nitrogen and phosphorus really invigorate plants and help them grow. How a World Order Ends: The Unraveling of the 19th Century Concert of Europe offers instructive lessons for today. We have a global economy, so that would logically lead to you need some kind of global governance and policing program if everybody's life and death survival is dependent on trade, getting medicines around the world, energy around the world, food around the world, and sometimes even water has to be moved around for people in certain areas to survive. So when they say a new world order, some kind of order is necessary, some kind of cooperation and governance, and that's just a fact, and people who conflate and exaggerate what that means. OPEC's reckoning: the cartel has weathered geopolitical storms in the past, but recent developments, both political and technical, signal its long-term viability is under increasing stress. A cartel is similar or analogous to a monopoly. A monopoly may have many sub-companies in it. That's what a cartel is. They cooperate to set prices for their mutual benefit. Most of your large oil companies are government-owned enterprises, or by royal families like Royal Dutch Shell and the Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, those countries there, they produce oil with a high EROI, energy return on investment, maybe as high as 80, versus tar sands, which is maybe only 3 or 4 EROI in Canada. They still have large deposits there, and it's easy to find. It's easy to extract and get to the refinery. So it's very profitable resource, and it's a vital resource. It's a life and death resource. None of the mechanized civilizations, whether it be the Netherlands or Brazil, Japan, can get by without fossil fuels for over 600,000 products that are made with it, such as paint and vinyl siding and asphalt roads and such. U.S. is forced to see it far from energy independent. The United States still imports millions of barrels of oil. Our neighbor Canada is devastating their land up there in Alberta, Canada, doing the tar sands. So we're not energy independent, and we're not a net energy exporter. Qatar will leave OPEC. Here's what this means. There's some quarreling and conflicts of interest between Qatar, which wants to send they're really a natural gas power, which is favored right now, which is methane, CH4, and that is because it is less polluting than coal, and especially that we've run out of what people think of as coal, anthracite coal, and we're going to lower grades of fossil fuels. That it's better to use methane, to heat our homes and to generate electricity for our cities. And then Saudi Arabia, it is a kingdom with a large clan, extended family. They can have multiple wives, and so if they have 3 wives and the children, and then they're not expected to use any birth control, some of them, have as many as 50 children fathered, the princes, and that has created this vast network of princes, and they have homes in London, Paris, New York, Hawaii, all over Switzerland and such, and New Zealand and places like that. They're all over the place, these princes, with the revenue they get. And the United States is got them firmly controlled, and being that it's so vital to the United States, because we have global multinational corporations. We have trillions of dollars of business we do overseas. Let's say Nike manufactures running shoes and athletic shoes in Vietnam or some other low-income country in Asia. So they need the factory to be able to maybe access large quantities of petroleum, to make into the plastics for the shoes and things. So, we have an interest that would maybe come from Saudi Arabia and then be shipped in a tanker to Vietnam. And so everything is internodal, interconnected, and whether or not we buy a lot of directly petroleum from Saudi Arabia, it's part of the global economy and the whole network that we have vested interests in. And by accusing them of different crimes and immoral behavior and chastising them, it's just another way. They're totally dependent on us for their defense and security. Excuse me. So they're really I would like to use the term a vassal state of the United States. They're not ally is a euphemism. That's a nice term. Like when you don't want to use a cuss word, you use a euphemism. Like I'm going to the bathroom, instead of using, you could use a more vulgar term about what you're going to do in there. uh, and vulgar isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes it has more punch. And communicates better what you are trying to say. The Inconvenient Truth About Saudi Arabia by this man, Richard N. Haas. He's the equivalent, I would say, of the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, or the vice president of operations, whatever they are titling him. He's a very powerful man, and pulls together people from all sectors of the society that are powerful, like the mass media, the military, intelligence agencies, manufacturing, banking, religion, all of it. And he brings them all together and tries to, he's probably one who actually generates policy that the government implements. And in the Council on Foreign Relations, you have both Republicans and Democrats, independents, all of them across the spectrum belong and follow the agenda that's set forth by the Council on Foreign Relations. How China systematically pries technology from U.S. companies. China is a failed state, not even really, it's just an authoritarian single party. They've made long-term, strategic, humongous errors in moving people off of peasant farms into cities. That's unsustainable, and they've hit those constraints and limits, and now they need to turn around and try to get people to move back to the countryside and start growing food instead of using mechanized petrochemical agriculture that's destroying their soil. So they have a high population. They have a huge amount of potential arable land if they start using permaculture and regenerative agriculture and start building their soil back up, which requires people bending over and doing manual labor. So they've tried to go to a model that was coming to the end of its lifespan by buying millions and millions of vehicles and machines, and the country's horrifically polluted. And they just have all kinds of problems. They don't have enough water, and they're going to, when natural climate change is happening, plus pollution and man-made driving and climate change with lots of CO2 and other greenhouse gases going into the, so they're just totally screwed. And I made videos on China, and they're not going to be taking over the world, or they're really a declining power in the world. They aren't going to be able to. I don't think they can save themselves. I think the majority of the Chinese are going to die in the next 50 years, and their birth rates are going to plummet because people aren't going to want to have children in such a dysfunctional, scary situation, and won't be allowed to, and their population's going to crash. Maybe by over 90% over the next 100 years. See, I think in decades, centuries, even millennia, not just what's going to happen in the next week or 90 days. How the U.S. Forced China to quit stealing. That's kind of the same thing with Saudi Arabia. It's a way to bully them around and push them around by troubling trade winds in Argentina. Argentina has used to be one of the world's wealthiest countries and has been a sick man for over a century, since they hit their peak in the 1800s. And in the power game, they're just too small. They have a lot going for them. They have an intelligent population. They have some brain power. They have some natural resources, some beautiful real estate. But the big, older, more established, first entrant players like the Netherlands just keep, beating them up and knocking them around. And the people there still live a high standard of living. If you look at videos, of people, of Argentina, even their working class neighborhoods. They have people still, generally have air conditioning, and they're able to get nutritious food, nutritious enough food to eat, and that type of thing. This guy here, C. Peter McClough, series on international economics. What he's going to do is put out the official narrative for the Council on Foreign Religion. A narrative is a story, and human beings remember by stories. So he is not going to tell what this Council on Foreign Relations real objectives are, tactically, strategically, shorter term, long term. He's going to put out the narrative that is to be propagated in much of the establishment. By that I mean the Department of Defense, the Department of State, Department of Education, all these tentacles of the establishment, the universities, so all throughout society, through all the major institutions, the churches, the synagogues, the mosques, where they have influence, he's going to project out the narrative, and it a lot of times is factually easily falsifiable. A lot of times it's nonsense, but that's what they're going to put out, because that's what's in the interest of the people who really run things. Are the families that make up the 0.2%, or what we would not 1% of the population, but not 1% of that 1%, but 0.2 of that. So there's really only 2,000 or 3,000 wealthy, well-established family networks, and everything in the establishment is done for their benefit, and not really for the general welfare. There have been some popular kind of revolts where they have given a little more piece of the pie and more consumption and resources to the average people, and even the multimillionaire people, but they don't. They keep the majority of everything locked down. So this is what's supposed to be propagated out. If you want to watch it, it's probably all nonsense. But if you and there are people who I think we have a capacity for self-delusion. It's a practical survival instinct. People had to have it when we were cavemen, and in the Stone Age for thousands of years. You have to delude yourself to go out and hunt and do dangerous things, and it helped. It actually maybe increases lifespan, even being able to self-delude yourself. And I think many of these agents that work for the 0.2 or the real small minority, they have actually deluded themselves, like many religious people delude themselves into whatever the dogmas and mythology of their religious heritage are correct. That it's literally correct, even if it's falsifiably false. They delude themselves that it's correct, and that they take advantage of that built-in survival tool that's in our epigenetics, and use that against to maintain power and control of the people. And I can't. If you look at the power and control, let's say, that the Egyptian pharaohs had over their people, and today, I would say it's about equivalent. With all the mass media and such, and the social media. I'm trying not to name names. That's why I'm kind of hesitating. they have so many tools to monitor everyone with all the computing power and all the observation, all the cameras and all the phones and on all the street corners um, and all the computers, and they can see everything that's going on. The super rich, powerful people even have godlike powers, pretty much. I mean, God with a little g, or with, because they can in a short amount of time be on the other side of the planet. They can watch what anybody is doing or saying about almost any moment, and they can dispatch them or poison them or do whatever they want to do to them. So they've really done a lot. But they used to have a huge amount of power too, and a lot of control. Whether it was in the Middle Ages or in the Iron Age, the Bronze Age. Defining political journalism in the digital age. An inside look at Russia. Russia is interesting. They are probably, let's say, over the next 100 years, not China, it is Russia, because they have, they unlike the United States, actually do. They have a smaller population of about only a third on a much larger land mass, and they have large amounts of fossil fuels and about every kind of natural resource, and they have per capita, per like 1,000 adults over the age of 30, they have about the most people who have attained college degrees in science, engineering, and in more empirical based rational social studies. So they have lots of brain power and talent and lots of resources and lots of land, and can just kind of shut their borders and live. They don't really need to import very much to maintain an industrial, mechanical based civilization. They'll probably be about the last place for the lights go out would be Russia. Plus, they're good, about the best in nuclear energy, as they've continued to use it and to build plants around the world for poor countries that want nuclear power. So they're about the best situated, and they are not a puppet or vassal of the United States like Saudi Arabia is, or Japan. Because of their nuclear weapons, because of their military, we really got them good after the First World War, when we sent huge amounts of money and revolutionaries and agitators there, and caused enormous harm and suffering that was just unimaginable, because Wall Street and the City of London financed the communist revolution, and on both, sold weapons to both sides, and then tried to sell huge amounts of machine tools and industrial machinery to them, and then tried to go over there and swindle them out of their timber and their iron ore and their coal and their oil. But eventually they wrested through a titanic efforts, and thousands and thousands of Russians died, but they got control of their own territory again. So that almost would be a good place to immigrate to kind of survive, the transition and the collapsing of mechanical civilization. So that's the Council on Foreign Relations. This video is a little bit long, but I'm going to go ahead and continue. This is Who Will Run the World? Oops. January, February 2019. I subscribe to this magazine. It's called Foreign Affairs, put out by the Council on Foreign Relations. I know it's just counterintelligence, psychological stuff. It's not very accurate, and they contradict themselves all over the place. Who will run the world? The fourth founding, the United States and the liberal order. And look at these guys here. How a world order ends. The stealth superpower, China. That's not real. I mean, it's not really true. It's the age and uneasy peace. We're not at peace. We're at war right now. Not with China, but in general, the United States is in war in several places around the world. A foreign policy for all. She's wearing a red jacket that symbolizes the United States Republican Party, which was a liberal party. Liberal means freedom, and they wanted freedom for the slaves. They were abolitionists. They wanted free enterprise, and their color is red. And the Communist Party, which wanted to have the majority of people in the working class to be whose societies run for the benefit of, instead of a small elite at the top, which has never worked in history, really. The eroding balance of terror, that is what they need to keep spending hundreds of billions of dollars, or $1 trillion if you count, all the NATO countries, and Japan and China and Korea and all those. So there's this huge amounts of defense spending, and you need to have this scarecrow or red herring of terror, which is just some ambiguous term, but that gives you an excuse to go all over the world. And if you need to snatch and grab, kidnap somebody, or you want to assassinate somebody gives you all, kind of carte blanche or a license to kill, like in the James Bond movies, because you've created this scarecrow, terror. How Congress can take back foreign policy, a playbook for Capitol Hill. Congress has no power. It's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the CFR, Council of Foreign Relations, and lobbyists draft the legislation and then tell them what to do. They control them with campaign contributions and blackmail and intimidation and even murder if necessary. U.S. foreign policy, America's Middle East purgatory. Well, we just need their oil, and we need to control their oil. It's too powerful and important to leave alone, so we just are going to be there as long as we're producing large amounts of oil from there. The crisis of peacekeeping. The Belgian king, when he was conquering Central Africa and getting the ivory and the rubber and the things that were valuable back then, it was supposed to be like a peacekeeping, benevolent, building schools, roads, churches, hospitals, enterprise, when it was really, they were putting people into slavery, executing people, whipping people, cutting their hands off in large numbers, and using the orphanages to brainwash people into being soldiers for King Leopold. So the aggression is called peacekeeping, where you want to control the uranium mines or the cobalt mines that are in that area, and you go in there saying you're going to do peacekeeping and benevolent stuff, but you're really there to get control of the natural resources, and then you loan them fiat money that has no intrinsic value, and then when they can't pay it back, you want to take hard, actual intrinsic assets from them for that, or demand that they, give you their access to their oil fields for your companies to, pump oil out, or to a mine for cobalt or diamonds or gold, whatever they have of value. Free trade, that means trade in the that's a euphemism for trade for the old wealthy countries like Switzerland, Sweden, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Canada, the United States, New Zealand, South Korea. So the countries that are mechanized and have high material standards of living, they want to be able to do whatever they want with a poor country like Vietnam or Bangladesh. They don't want them being able to do what they did and have an economic development program where they use tariffs to protect their emerging new industries, because they're starting off hundreds of years later than some of the other countries like Belgium, that's been around a long time as an industrial country with machinery and electricity and that kind of thing. So they would benefit from having tariffs so that they could build their own electrical machinery and transformers and converters and inverters and all that kind of stuff, but capacitors, whatever. But they don't. They're told that they have to compete against companies that might be 100 years old and have all that knowledge and expertise and patents and copyrights and all that, and then they have to buy it from them instead of developing their own and becoming independent. And then eventually, when they're ready, then taking down the tariffs and competing, with these well-established companies, maybe in 30, 50 years. Trump versus the government. That's just a Punch and Judy show, like in the Middle Ages and the 18th century. People, children and people would sit on the ground or on little stools and watch people with hand puppets or marionettes, and then they like to watch them with their whoopee cushions making flatulent sounds and then hitting each other. And a lot of times they might be a cardinal that was well known at the time, or a prince or something. And the aristocrats allowed this to happen, at festivals and things like that. And they did. So that's what this is. That's nothing. Another straw man, red herring. America's long goodbye. The real crisis in the Trump era. That's the same thing. Deep fakes in the new disinformation war. Well, that's what this is on foreign affairs. They're fake news, disinformation, propaganda. As is almost all the alternative media is horrific. They put out all kinds of nonsense and fabricate all kinds of things, and the people with a lot of their web channels are completely ignorant and don't understand what's going on in the world, and are just spewing out stuff. That's the alternative media. Mainstream media isn't quite so bad, but they are there for their advertisers. They're not there to inform the public and to be a public service. They just want to get eyeballs to the screen to sell soap and pickup trucks and sport utility vehicles and makeup and that kind of thing. The unhackable election. Our elections are just a Punch and Judy show, a three-ring circus of entertainment, because who gets elected makes no difference, because the lobbyists, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and just wealthy, powerful old family leaders, elders, make all the decisions. And this is just for public consumption, the senators and congressmen. If you talk to people who are really from powerful old families, they would, if you would recommend that they run for the Senate or something, most of them are like, egads, that's disgusting. I would never want to do that. Well, more, less, or different, where the U.S. foreign policy should or shouldn't go. Foreign policy, a lot of it needs to be secretive. You can't be always showing your hand out there. So whatever's on here is, not going to be. A lot of it is just content for the editorial staff of the mass media and for university professors, deans, and things like that to put out, the right propaganda that they want disseminated. Snake oil economics, bad math. Well, about everybody who looks at it rationally, we are in an unsustainable system. That's what the Federal Reserve Bank says. That unsustainable means at some point it's going to collapse. And that's just from the monetary fiscal standpoint. And then you have the biophysical aspect, the reality of joules and newtons and calories and that type of measurements. And, as we destroy our soil and exhaust our fossil fuels, because by 2070, our fossil fuels are projected to be completely exhausted. That includes fracturing and horizontal drilling and all that, plus all the Middle East oil, and the tar sands, everything. Well, there'll be, I guess, tar sands. We could get a couple million or 3 million barrels a day with a 3 or EROI, but it takes at least 15 energy return on energy investment from your energy source to sustain a mechanical industrial civilization. So you can't maintain a civilization with that, even though it's vast. And the same with fracking is real low. It's probably below 15, but it may be above 10. It's really hard to get a good number there. I haven't seen any good research on it where there's been a good accounting of total life cycle of horizontal fracturing. If you could send me an email, I'd appreciate it if you have a good source on that. When empires end, the British Empire didn't end. It just turned. When the British Empire ended, the United Kingdom boomed and their standard of living skyrocketed and their quality of life. They went to a financial debt peonage away from having to have all the infrastructure of the empire, but they maintained all their business there and were able to make more profits with a much lower expense. So getting rid of the empire was a brilliant, clever idea, a genius move, and so they get all the benefits, more benefits than they had before, without the responsibility of taking on governance and building hospitals and schools and all that they were trying to do before, and maintaining justice for rapists and serial killers and all that. All they get is what they really want, which is access to the labor and the raw materials, and be able to put factories there, put their machine tools and machines in there, and then make whatever, or have their call centers or whatever they want to do. Okay. This is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and this is the issues that they are concerned with: agriculture, healthcare, infrastructure, labor. They're the biggest they lobby. Remember, there's only so many congressmen and senators, 100 senators, and I think 435 congressmen. I may not, but it doesn't really matter. They spend over $1 billion lobbying that small group of people. And it's a huge amount. They basically write them and a couple of the other major groups write the legislation, and the elected officials don't even have the time to read it because they have to spend half of their waking hours fundraising for the next election. And so they're just collecting bribes half the day. And then they have staffs that do the day-to-day work, and they just are basically told, when to say yay and nay, and sometimes they don't even show up for the votes. So they're kind of concerned with trade because a huge amount, over a third of U.S. manufacturing and industry is overseas to take advantage of cheap labor. So with over $2 trillion of intrinsic concrete investments overseas, the United States wants free trade so it can move everything in and out. Sometimes they make half a dozen trips between different countries, in the building of a more complex machine or computer. So they want everything to be able to just be moved around the world, and then to where the end purchaser is. It may bounce around between a half a dozen countries and end up being sold to someone in Argentina. They don't like the whole Brexit thing. They think that's bad for business because it creates uncertainty. And on that, I understand. Steel embargoes is on their agenda here. The high price of tariffs again. And then, real quick, I'll just see what I'll go with let's just pick healthcare, see what they say about healthcare. In many ways, U.S. healthcare is the envy of the world. That is a blatant lie. We're known for being the sick man of the world. We have the highest per capita expenditure on healthcare, and of the wealthy and mechanized countries have about the worst outcome. So I don't think we're the envy of the world. It has helped many individuals live longer than ever and enjoy a better quality of life than previously possible. Well, for lots of Americans, their quality of life and health has been in decline for decades now, and we're probably going to see lowerings of life expectancies and such. And we don't really have reliable data, because we know the government, how they lie about inflation, they can lie about this too if they don't think it's in the interest of the establishment. But people seem to be generally, some people in the establishment have come out and said that, for example, working class white males have lower life expectancies than they used to and are under more stress. However, we continue to place the challenge of making quality health care more affordable, more accessible, and more reliable for Americans. Well, for the African American community, which is a large plurality here where I live, they've been doing worse, I think. It's just amazing. I mean, you see people walking around with crutches on and hear stories of people dying right and left in the African American community at relatively young ages. The Chamber is focused on promoting effective private sector solutions to our health care challenges that will help control costs, expand access, and improve quality of care. I just think that's just a blatant lie. The Chamber's healthcare priorities include advancing successful ideas, promoting reforms, raising awareness, expanding access. The opioid crisis, that's a big one the world over. Not as bad in the U.S. as it is in most countries. Like India has a much order of magnitude worse problem with drugs. Same with Mexico and Colombia. As I've traveled around the world, it's just horrific. The drug problems in places like Mexico and India. Opioid abuse and addiction to illegal opioids can become a nationwide epidemic with a tremendous peril on human lives, the labor participation rate, businesses, and economic growth. Well, they have no solution because we're a wealthy country with a large pharmaceutical or affluent country. People are in pain, want pain relief. If you are really in chronic pain, you have a bad back, or arthritis, there's all kinds of ailments you could have that are painful. You might, to function and be happier, even if you're tough and have a high pain threshold, it's nice not to have to feel the pain and have a higher quality of life. So a whole, and if you're a member of those elite, if your family, has $1 billion net worth, you can get, if you, let's say, have a bad arthritis condition and are in chronic pain in your back and your hands and such, you can go get the meds and painkillers, and certainly would. I mean, why be in pain when you don't have to be in pain? So it seems like it's really a war on the people. Boy, that was a long one. I'm going to go ahead and bid you adieu and aloha and ciao.